Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about The Umbrella Academy Season 4, Episode 4. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So the opening of this episode finally gives us insight to, first and foremost, how Ben died and how this all connects to Jennifer. They were sent on a mission and they were supposed to destroy a container. Said container had Jennifer in it. So I'm curious if this is supposed to be her post the squid in this particular timeline, because this is the original timeline where Ben died. And that is so effed up where multiple things. One, I was not because I thought like, oh my god, is he going to explode or something? Is it going to be a brutal death? It's a brutal death only in the regards of, holy crap, Reginald's the one that killed Ben and Jennifer. Just headshotted both of them. I was like, that's so jacked up. And you know that's got to like upset Luther a little bit, because he's the one that really pushed for Ben to like, he's the one, well, for one, he's the one that reported it to their dad. I mean, sadly, that's Luther. He's the good soldier. So it's like, right, dad told us not to open the container, just to blow it up. And Ben was just like, whoa, there's an innocent person in here. Like, we need to help them. And the question is, would any of them have ever gone against their father's wishes and actually helped Jennifer? It begs the question. So it adds so many layers to everything. It makes sense why Ben and Jennifer are so connected, and it seems like that connection like goes against timelines and everything, because they're not from, like, it's not even like he's been from the original timeline. He's been from the Sparrow timeline, and who knows if she's, I mean, it's a new timeline where she's still alive. So once again, everything's collapsing into this timeline, so it makes you wonder, it's just this timeline, this universe is Jennifer versus the one that, like, I don't think this is like the original timeline Jennifer is here, because she still would have potentially been dead, but everything played out. Well, it's hard to say because things played out differently. So it makes me, well, because Reginald found her when, well, the world discovered her when she was in the squid, but I'm wondering, is that before she got, I mean, because I guess he got access to her first in this universe than in the original timeline, because he became aware of her in the original timeline, but she was already in other people's hands. So I guess the moment she came out of this squid, he immediately grabbed her up in this particular timeline. So I guess that's how that works. But also, that might be, and someone correct me, that might be the most messed up umbrella we've ever gotten in the show. Like, I haven't remembered every umbrella we've gotten, you know, but like, that's brutal. The umbrella being made from Ben and Jennifer's bodies, like, that might be the most brutal one that I can think of all the time. That's so dark. But now it's like, yeah, that's the thing your father wants you to forget, that he murdered your brother in cold blood right in front of you. So, yeah. And that, obviously, everyone understandably is hurt and upset, but then Reginald's still like, that wasn't me. He even said last episode, oh, wiping your memories about something, I didn't do it, but sounds like something I would do. So it doesn't I guess it becomes that thing of, I didn't do it, a different version of me did it. It's like, should I be culpable for that? That becomes a timey-wimey, like, alternate timeline, alternate universe type of thing of, should I be held responsible for what a different version of me did, even though those versions of you are still the same core person? You might not have done it, but you are capable of doing it, because everything that other Reginald did, even though you didn't do it, it's still something you would have done if the circumstances called for it. And I loved how that situation ended with, you know, Reginald still being like, oh, we got to kill one of them. It's either Ben or Jennifer or both, because it might be a thing of, it's already too late, because Luther's like, oh yeah, so I didn't tell you guys about this. There's kind of this rash that Ben had that was glowing and pulsating red. So like, okay, you didn't think that was important? He's like, I don't know. Like, I thought it was just a byproduct of our powers. We were all feeling like crap and all having side effects. But I love that, like, Reginald was like, oh, we got to kill one of them. And Allison's the first one that stepped up, grabbed that dish, and threw it back of Reginald's head. It's like, yo, you're not in control here, old man. And then Victor stood up. It's been years in the making. This, because they didn't have their chance back in season 2, because for one, it was also like Reginald in the past, and this is still not their Reginald, and, you know, didn't have this opportunity in season 1 because Victor didn't know who they were in multiple cases, didn't know about the truth about their powers and how they've been treated their entire life, and how Allison rumored them to forget that they were special. So there's that, but also Victor figure out who he is. So there's it feels even more impactful. Like I said, it's been seasons in the making. It's been years in the making that Victor and Reginald conversation, and it's so good. He's holding him back with his powers, and it's like, you're not going to kill my brother. All that you put Ben through, Jennifer, me, all of us, you know, kind of like putting him in his place with Victor doing that with his powers. I'm like, it felt, I legitimately got up and cheered. Like I said, it's like, that's because all those siblings have suffered, but Victor went through a special hell because of their father, you know, and it's like, because it's like, oh, you want to make it, he's like, because he's like, oh, this is all your fault for rescuing setting Jennifer free. He's like, no, you want to put the blame on us. This is your fault. This all started because of you. It's easy to put the blame on your children, but you set everything in motion. Everything that's ever happened in the course of this story has been you. Maybe things would played out differently if you treated your children right instead of being a piece of shit. You don't know what it is to be a father. You know, you might be a decent husband, maybe. We don't really get to see too much of it. I mean, your wife likes you obviously enough, but you know, she likes you enough to know how to deal with you, but also doesn't see you as a piece of shit that your kids have had to deal with, like, decades of dad issues and trauma because of you. It's like, you have fucked all your children up, whether it's the Umbrella Academy, whether it's the Sparrows. You're a piece of shit across every timeline, as Victor kind of points out later on. But I even love Reginald's wife being like, you and your father are so headstrong. I was almost wondering whether, because I almost thought like Victor was going to like paralyze him. It's like, oh, you want to see me like put you down again? It's like, cool, I will paralyze you so you can't go after our brother, you know? And so later on, Victor's the one that talks to Reginald about, like, right, I can remove the marigold from somebody. I don't know if he's going to be able to remove what's inside of Jennifer, because because he did it before with Harlan back in season 2. And it's like, yeah, it's a little rough, but I can do it. And it's like, well, why would you do that? Like, why would you go through that? It's like, because Ben's my brother. It's like, oh, he's like, family's such a stupid thing. He's like, yeah, I get it. Like, we argue all the time. I literally got as far away from my family as I could multiple times over the years. But at the end of the day, my family's my family, and we are there for each other when shit hits the fan, you know? And it's like, Reginald knows nothing about that, because the only person he's ever really cared for in this life, truly cared for, is his wife. Everyone else has just been a means to an end, you know? That's all anyone is, and you're very lonely. And it's like, he had some retort, and Victor was like, yeah, maybe, but at the end of the day, across every timeline, you're still an asshole. Like, there's no, because that's the thing, like, every version we've ever met of Reginald has been an asshole. Past, present, future, whatever the case may be, alternate timeline, you're still a piece of shit, you know? So, but like, I love that Victor had that, especially because Victor's probably, I mean, they've all held on to it so much, but it's like, it's paralyzed Victor for so long, and to be able to finally get that off your chest, to put your dad in his place, to let him know, like, this is who I am. You stripped me of who I am, but I'm not, like, I recognize now, I thought you knew everything. You defined me. I let you define me for so much of my life, but I know who I am now. I also grown up to realize you don't know shit. Like I said, I legitimately got so hyped for that. Because it's such a poetic moment, especially for the final season, for Victor to have that moment with their dad, you know, out of anybody. And like, I love that no other sibling stepped in the way. Everyone was like, nah, Victor, you do that. That's all on you, Victor. You got that. Because Victor's just replicating what every one of those siblings wishes they could do and what they want in that moment. Especially after finding out you murdered our brother and made us forget, you piece of shit. So we had the whole situation of they went to the farm where Jean and Jean were holding her, where Ben rescued her, but they've long since been gone. And I love Allison's able to say, oh, the bodies have been here about 7-8 hours. It's like, how do you know that? It's like, well, because of a TV show. It was like a police drama. It's like, yeah, you pick up enough stuff, you watch enough crime dramas, you watch enough Law and Order. You watch enough like Chicago PD. Funny enough, I've only seen bits and pieces of Chicago PD, but I've watched enough Law and Order and Law and Order, SVU, and NCIS to know some stuff about. Well, I've watched enough police procedurals in general. Let's kind of classify it as that, So I get that, and I love that situation. So we kind of have like the group like very scattered. Obviously, Ben's off with Jennifer. We have Reginald and Victor. Allison went back home to check on Claire. Well, she was actually trying to check on Klaus, which we'll jump to that really quickly, where it's really interesting how like therapeutic, like very therapist brained like Claire was when she kind of talked about like, because Allison was like, oh, your uncle, he's got a sickness, he's got a disease. She's like, yeah, but what about your side of the street, Mom? Like, shouldn't you, like, Uncle Klaus is his circumstances, but what about you? And she was like, yo, Missy, don't, like, act like you understand the intricacies of me and my brother's relationship. The fact is that he always gets like this, and he always calls me to pick up the pieces. She's like, yeah, but he's immortal, isn't he? So why would he need you to save his life if he's immortal? Maybe he could just save himself. And she's just kind of like, wow, when did you get so smart? She's like, fine. And it's like, okay, we can go help him one last time. And Allison's like, okay, cool, I'll go change. It's like, right. Doesn't want to abandon her brother. It's just like, come on, Because it's like, just as much as Klaus needs her, she needs him. They need each other. It's like, right, we don't have to be around each other all the time, but we are family through and through. We might argue. We might even have attempted to kill each other at one point in time. But at the end of the day, we are family, and we always find our way through. So we have that. So speaking of Klaus, let's jump into Klaus's circumstances really quickly. Basically, Quinn has turned him into a medium whore, which sounds so weird phrasing it like that, but it's like, yeah, like you're whoring him out as a medium. That like that lady wanted to have sex with her. I figured that was a money situation, but then it turned into a let's bone thing. So I was like, oh, maybe I misread that situation, and it turns out no, it was in fact there's money missing. I need to know where it's at. Poor Klaus. Because at first I was like, oh, is the whole thing bullshit because he has to create the atmosphere, but then it turns out it is real. So it almost seemed like he wasn't expecting it. I don't know if she's like the first client or not. Also, I completely misread that situation. Because last episode I was like, oh, is he going to get not a 1-to-1, but I thought he's going to be treated like Cassidy from Preacher. That was the example. That was the analogy I used. If you've seen the TV show Preacher and you know what Cassidy's circumstances are, like I said, not exactly his circumstances, but something of that immortal ilk, Which I didn't even think about that at the time I made that reference. It's funny. Obviously, Robert was in Misfits, but so was Joseph Gilgun, who played Cassidy in Preacher. He was also in Misfits for seasons 3, 4, and 5. But anyway, I didn't even think about that last episode when I referenced Preacher and Cassidy. But anyway, that's kind of funny connection there. But yeah, I wasn't expecting him to get whored out like that. That was interesting. Get possessed by the ghost, and Dick and I think the character's name is Loretta, like end up banging it out. And then she shows up later on wanting the money that he hid. So I thought that was fascinating. So, poor Klaus getting his genitals squished like that. Because it's like, well, he didn't feel it until he came back into his body. But it's like, yeah, because Dick was feeling all of that. But Klaus pointed her in the right direction. But I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was like, well, maybe that was all metaphorical, but then we find out later on, like, oh, Klaus lied to her about where the money was stashed. I was like, oh, like, you didn't mention the dog statue, but it's like, oh, that's where the thunderbolt of it all comes in. Like, that's why I was like, oh, I guess it's all metaphorical. I guess that was the password, but we didn't see anything about a bank. I just took Klaus at face value. I should have been like, oh, yeah, Klaus is Klaus, so he would lie. I mean, to be fair, like, he was fine, or at least okay with this arrangement with Quinn, except he wasn't, like, it's kind of sadly, it's a human trafficking situation of, well, you work for us to pay off your debt, and it's like, oh, but we've put you further and further and further in debt, so you'll never get out. And, like, Quinn was basically putting Klaus in that situation. Luckily, he breaks out, tracks down the money, and it's so interesting because that storyline would be a movie all in its own right. So it's just kind of interesting to know it's like a part of this final season and part of Klaus's story. But yeah, Loretta followed him to the money because she knew he was lying. And then Quinn knew exactly like, oh, I just had to wait and find, I knew a rat would find the cheese. And it turns into a shootout. And at first I was actually surprised. I was like, huh, I was so certain like they were going to shoot you and then bury you and that was going to suck ass. And I'm like, oh. And even he's like, wow, I wasn't expecting. I was like, yeah, everyone's dead. Quinn's alive, of course, knocks him out, puts him in the casket, and then starts covering up the grave. And you're like, well, that sucks because every time Klaus dies, he's going to come back to life. And when he comes back to life, he's going to die all over again. It's like, that sucks ass. That is horrible. So, like, yeah, that's the downside of immortality. And Quinn knows exactly what he's doing with that moment. So, speaking of Misfits, it's actually kind of interesting. Once again, kind of a spoiler for Series 1/Series 2, but it's funny, that's how Nathan discovers that he's immortal. Robert Sheehan's character in Misfits is he found that like after he died and he gets buried, he wakes up inside of a casket and basically he died over and over and over again and just came back to life over and over again. So yeah, it's fun. Once again, I'm like, I don't know if they mean to do that. Like, it's just like immortal storytelling. What's the most effed up situation we could put Klaus in? But it almost feels like it has to be like a wink and nod to Misfits. Or like I said, I could just be reading way too much into that. But it's just an interesting parallel in that capacity. So I thought that was so interesting. But it's like, well, hopefully Allison and Claire will be able to find him. And I also hope Quinn gets what's coming to him. Because it seemed like amongst his men, I mean, granted, we don't know if he's got more men. I don't know if those are his only men or whatever the case may be. He was going to up and disappear. But I hope Klaus is able to get his get back, so. Or Allison's going to do it one. I'm curious, like, how you'd even begin tracking Klaus down under these circumstances. Like, you don't know he's buried alive and stuff. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. We've got... Also, this episode, we have Lila and Five pairing off yet again. So that's an interesting, like... Well, I mean, they set up that pairing in season 2 to some smaller extent, but now it's like you're paying it off even more this season of them just kind of paired off together. Because her and Diego continue. I actually forgot to talk about the fact is last episode she was like, yeah, Diego, let's go on a split. Which is like, yeah, she says she loves Diego, but she just needed something outside of the family situation. Because it's like, Diego, what do? You come home, me and the kids have to watch you mope around about your life, your in-laws, yada, yada, yada. She's like, if I have any issues, I like our life being what it is. I need it. It's more Diego's attitude about life, I think. Like, life in general can drag you down, but I think it's like Diego's attitude about it. She's like, at least I take whatever bullshit I have about life, I kind of leave that on the outside before I come home. You have kind of made our whole home environment like that. So they both got stuff they need to figure out. So when Five gives them an opportunity to chill at the CIA because they're all about that. I mean, Luther didn't give a shit at first, but he kind of gets dragged along because Diego's like, well, we're kind of a package deal, but not knowing that Five basically has his boss babysitting you. And the fact is his boss is so willing to do it must mean like Five is just that good at his job. Understandable. And the man's got years and years of experience working for a clandestine organization, plus he's older than what he looks like, so... Makes a lot of sense that he probably get a lot more leeway. That it's like, yeah, can you distract my brothers? It's like, okay, fine, you owe me. As long as you're shutting down, as long as you're solving this case, it's fine. So, Lila and Five, their plan is to go to the apocalypse time, go to the original timeline's apocalypse, go back in time to 2006, and stop Ben from ever going on that mission. So they're like, well, we can avert a lot of stuff and change things. That was kind of, but I was also thinking like, yeah, but that'd be like a different timeline. Like, how would that help your current? But I guess the argument could be like, well, if they never met, then events playing out the way they did, but wouldn't that only affect that timeline? But I guess it's like, that means everything in that timeline would play out the way it does until we eventually get to the current timeline, so that would affect the timeline they came from. But I'm like, I wouldn't think it would. I'd assume that would just branch off into another timeline. So I really don't understand like how stopping Ben in that timeline would change anything, but it's like, well, time travels, the rules of time travel vary from fiction to fiction, so maybe in this time frame it is a thing of no, that would in fact affect our timeline. It wouldn't branch off into a new timeline. It would just cause ripples that would change our timeline, so Ben and Jennifer's circumstances never played out the way they did, even though it is like a different Ben that they're with. So that begs the question. I mean, because who? That's what I'm saying. Like, what kind of effect? That's what I don't get about that part of the plan. I'm like, I don't understand. Like, maybe I'm an idiot. I'm like, I'm not understanding how saving Ben and that, or stopping him from going on that mission would save them. I have no idea. I love the reveal though that, okay, let's go back to 2006, but except that apocalypse timeline they found isn't the original timeline. It's a completely different timeline, which is something I talked about previously. I was like, oh, it's just the two timelines that the shows come across. I was like, no, there's a multitude of timelines they know nothing about that are out there. In fact, this particular timeline where it's not the Umbrella Academy or the Sparrow Academy, it's a combination of the two, the Phoenix Academy, which I was like, that's interesting. So it's not the original timeline. So it's like, okay, so how do we navigate this place? I, for a second, thought when Five got on the train, I was like, crap, he's going to leave Lila behind and this is going to be a whole shit show. But no, they're both on the train. She was reading the map, being like, oh, it's this, and this. But while they're on the train, they missed their stop. And they're like, what's going on? And the only word you could understand was express. So I was like, okay, so they're not on the same train. Because the train usually, like, when it passes by, like, the glow is orangish yellow. This time it was green because I think they're on the express train. So cool. And they don't know how to navigate this place either. So that's fucked. What timeline are you going to end up? Cool. Like, that's going to be a whole fucked circumstance. It's what timeline are you going to manage to find yourself towards? Finding your way back, and even if you do, like, how do you know you ended up in the right timeline? It's like, since there's some things that can be so similar yet different, because like using that Phoenix timeline, it's like, yeah, the apocalypse still happened like it normally would. It's just in that timeline, it isn't just the Umbrellas, it's going to be the Phoenixes, which begs the question, once they go on their journey in that particular timeline, who the fuck do they meet? Since the Sparrows are already a thing, well, there are no Sparrows. I guess that would mean like the what would have been the Sparrows in that timeline are going to be like a different organization that's mixed with the remaining Umbrellas and Phoenixes that weren't there. Maybe that's how that. I'm scattered. I'm like messing my own brain up thinking about that. It's like that's a lot to think about. Funny stuff like that. Just kind of a thought exercise thing to think about, like, oh yeah, like what that might mean in the long run for some of those timelines. That one in particular. It's like, yeah, you get the same story for the most part, just different outcomes and interactions because it's different, members of the academy and stuff. It's funny to think about. So we have that. Then we go back to Ben and Jennifer. She doesn't really have anywhere else to go, and neither does Ben. Even though he technically has his family, it's still like, you're not my family. He's like, as I brought up previously, he wants to fit in, but it's the thing of, yeah, in their eyes, they're treating me like the Ben they know. Like, so they have I might not be the exact same Ben, but they know me because they had a Ben. Whereas I never had a Luther, Allison, Diego, Victor, or Klaus, or Five. I had my own siblings and they're all dead. So he felt even more of like an outsider amongst the family, even though they kind of tried to embrace him. He's kind of an asshole, and his assholery doesn't fit with the assholeness that is the Umbrella Academy, because it doesn't change the fact is he feels like he doesn't belong here. He kind of got dragged along inadvertently. So for him, it's like him and Jennifer are bound together, and it's still like, he's like, yeah, ever since we've met, I can't stop thinking about you. She's the same way. Hell, they're in different rooms watching the same Blob movie. And I even love, like, oh, what channel is it on? 6. It's like, okay, of course, perfect. But like I said, I think it's so interesting that it's like that connection was already there even before they touch. It's amplified what was already there, but it almost feels like a fate and destiny thing that, right, in the original timeline, you know, or maybe across a lot of timelines, you kind of not exactly a Romeo and Juliet thing, but it's always meant to be like a star-crossed lovers. Like, it never works out, and then, you know, it could always lead to catastrophe. I didn't talk about it, but I forgot to talk about it. Basically, what's inside of Jennifer is the opposite element to the Marigold that's in all of the Umbrella Academy. And the Sparrows in general, because it's like those two elements mixing is what causes the cleanse. And it's the end of everything. Again. So, that's how this whole situation works. But it also, even Ben pointed out, it's like, right, you were a 6-year-old inside of a squid. I have tentacles. It almost feels like it was meant to be. And they proceed to bang it out at the end of the episode. And it has repercussions as it's killing. You see a whole bunch of dead birds falling from the sky. That dude who works at the motel or whatever, poor guy got it so hard. He's literally projectile vomiting like black goo. Looks like his eyes got burned out. It's like, man. So that's what that does to him. So I would assume that's less brutal than last season when people would just basically disappear from existence. That seemed less painful for this. That looks horrendous. And maybe it's going to get worse as it spreads out and gets stronger, because maybe that's just the first wave of it. Like, given enough time, maybe it'll be a lot more of a brutal death for anyone that gets caught up in that energy. We'll have to wait to see. Finally, we have Gene and Jean stopping by, what was it, a King Reg? Is that what it was? It's basically a Burger King, but in this universe, Reg is kind of like bought up a whole bunch of franchises and like owns a whole bunch of companies. So it ends up being a meeting spot for the Keepers, and they're looking for Ben and Jennifer. But then lo and behold, who shows up? Sai, which I'm like, okay. Once again, I'm back to being like, okay, so who are you then? So obviously you're not connected to Reginald, not that we're aware of, but you're also not connected to the Keepers. You know enough to lie to them to pretend like you're from a different chapter of the Keepers. But like, you know all of this. You're the one that pushed Ben. That's why I was so confused last episode, because I was like, well, it seemed like I said, Gene and Jean let them go because it was necessary. But I thought they were working with Sai, but they don't know Sai. Which I even love that he was talking to Gene, being like, oh, can I call you Gene? And Gene was like, no, you cannot. And you can see he's getting a little jealous of Gene and, quote, Sai seem to be hitting it off. Like, I can tell that's bothering him. Probably end up being a point of contention, and it might kind of divide the both of them. We'll see how that turns out, but it feels like that's what they might be setting up. But who the hell are you, Sai, and what are you after then? It seems like you want this to happen, but you're also using the Keepers for something too. It just seems like you need pieces to place. You need all the pieces on the board to play their part for whatever's to come, and I just not sure what this is and how this is all going to play out and how it's all going to end. Only 2 episodes left, so it's definitely going to be really interesting to see where all of this ends up ultimately taking us. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.